Everybody ready? All right. Good afternoon. I'm here to give an update on the fire situation in Oregon, and I'm joined on the phone by our Oregon Department of Forestry Fire Chief Doug Graff, Oregon Chief State Fire Marshal Mariana Ruiz Temple, General Mike Stenzel, Oregon Office of Emergency Management Director Andrew Phelps, and from the Oregon Health Authority Environmental Public Health Section Manager Gabriella Goldfarb. We now find ourselves 1 week into this fire event, and without question, our state has been pushed to its limits. It's really hard for all of us to wrap our heads around the devastation that these fires have caused and the pain and the suffering that so many Oregonians have endured over the past few days. Sadly, we have now learned of 10 fire-related fatalities, as confirmed by our state medical examiner. I am at a loss for words over these deaths. Dan and I are holding these families in our hearts during this extremely difficult time. Again, these fatalities are confirmed by the Oregon State Medical Examiner. Local medical examiners will continue to report additional fatalities, and the Office of Emergency Management will begin releasing updates on confirmed statewide totals. As we look toward the next few days, my firefighting teams tell me they are optimistic that cooler weather coming toward the end of this week will be a tremendous help. We are incredibly grateful that our calls for assistance are also being answered, with crews from all over the country and Canada coming to help. For example, we expect structural firefighting teams from North Dakota and Michigan to join our response this week. Michigan, California, and Washington are providing resources to our Emergency Coordination Center. Vermont and Nevada have reached out asking how they can help. Scores of representatives from FEMA are also now on the ground assisting with the response effort. Additionally, today, I sent a letter to the President asking that he declare a major disaster in the state of Oregon. I want to say thank you. We are incredibly grateful for this national support. I want to thank these crews for joining us in the firefight. We can certainly use all the help we can get. We'll also be working with the National Guard to deploy approximately 250,000 N95 masks to our agricultural workers and impacted tribes across the state. Our communities across Oregon are suffering right now. The wildfires burning our state are compounding hardships for our Latinx and underserved communities in Southern Oregon, rural Oregonians throughout the Santiam and Mackenzie River basins, and tribal communities in Chiloquin. Additionally, the smoke blanketing the state is a constant reminder that this tragedy has not yet come to an end. Without question, the immediate need is great. I am so grateful for all the local organizations, nonprofits, and volunteers working long hours to help Oregonians recover. I encourage anyone who has the means to do so to donate to the Red Cross, the Oregon Food Bank, or their local relief agencies. However, I think we all know that we are a long way from recovery. It feels like a cruel twist of fate that many Oregon communities already disproportionately suffering from the impacts of COVID-19 or the flooding in Umatilla earlier this year now face even more hardship. That's why I've asked 3 of Oregon's largest foundations, the Ford Family Foundation, the Meyer Memorial Trust, and the Oregon Community Foundation, to establish a fund to help plan for what comes next. Contributions will focus on recovery in both the medium and long terms. This new fund, called the 2020 Community Rebuilding Fund, will help us invest in long-term recovery, particularly for our most vulnerable communities. Other organizations are welcome to contribute to this fund as a way to get their donations to those most in need. I'm also incredibly grateful for the quick response of these three foundations. They each bring unique expertise and an understanding of the challenges our communities will face in the aftermath of these fires. For example, Meyer Memorial Trust ensures that equity is at the center of their work and that vulnerable Oregonians, particularly Latinx and tribal communities, will be centered as we rebuild. The Ford Family Foundation has a deep understanding of the needs of rural Oregonians. And the Oregon Community Foundation works with every community in the state, bringing diverse voices and donors to the table. We will have a long road ahead, but I am so heartened by these foundations and by all Oregonians who are coming together right now. Philanthropic dollars serve as critical building blocks and leverage for public and private investments that can help build us back stronger. The 2020 Community Rebuilding Fund is an important next step on our path toward recovery as we work to build a more resilient Oregon. I want to end this briefing by highlighting the heroic actions of individual Oregonians, like Christiana Rainbow Plews, whom most people call Chief Rainbow, the Upper Mackenzie Rural Fire Protection District Chief. She and her teams were the first ones on the scene at the Holiday Farm fire. She called immediately for backup and ordered level 3 evacuations, which enabled as many people as possible to get out of the area safely. We all know how quickly that fire moved. It ended up traveling 20 miles, destroying Chief Rainbow's own house. A dozen of her district volunteer firefighters also lost their homes, as well as their fire station in Blue River. Yet through it all, Chief Rainbow and her team have stayed on the front lines of the fire, protecting the homes and the lives of as many Oregonians as possible. She and her team remind us of why we love this state. This is just what we do here in Oregon. We care for each other no matter what. Thank you, Chief Rainbow, and to all the folks out there doing what they can do in this crisis, whether it be firefighting, following guidelines from local officials, or donating your time and money. The only way out of this crisis is through it, and we'll only get through it together. With that, I will turn it over to our Fire Chief, Doug Graff.
Thank you, Governor Brown. Doug Graff here, Chief of Fire Protection. First, I'd speak to the favorable weather conditions that we have through this week. Some challenges, though, with high winds. Second, I'll speak to current fire conditions, where I see some pressure points relative to that forecast. We'll talk about high level, all the fires currently on the landscape and our progress to date. And I'll close by turning it to Mariana Ruiz-Temple with the Oregon State Fire Marshal to close relative to fire conditions. So first of all, we are past the east wind weather event that put us on the landscape. We've had 4 days of good firefighting weather, and we've made great progress with those 4 days. The next 5 days through this week, we continue to have a westerly flow, which brings cooler temperatures and, generally speaking, higher humidities. So that's favorable. However, we do have increased winds in central south Oregon, where we have a couple fires I'll speak to where I think we'll have some challenges. We've been hoping for rain. That was forecasted to begin today, but it looks like currently the latest forecast puts that rain out in the Wednesday, Thursday range. And the unfortunate piece of the forecast is that rain may come with some lightning and thunderstorms, particularly on the east side of the state, which could cause new fire stats. So kind of a mixed bag today relative to the weather, but overall, compared to what we dealt with the east winds, this gives us a lot of opportunity to make good progress. Where I see the pressure points on existing fires across the landscape is those winds I spoke to in south central Oregon, particularly on the Bratton fire that's burning just south of Paisley, sitting at just over 30,000 acres. This fire made a solid run on us to the south. I'm pleased to announce we were fortunate to hold the lines on the north side of that fire to protect the town of Paisley. So that's an area I'm concerned about relative to those winds. The 242 fire in and around Chillicum has held the lines now for over 48 hours. So the wind will test those lines, but I continue to grow confidence that we'll be able to hold those. That's 100% lined on 242 fire that sits at acres in the range of 14,000 acres. So great work to that team there. Another place I'm concerned with the winds, and this is at the crest of the Cascades, just north of Diamond Lake. I expect the Thielsen fire to continue to grow, and that's deep in federal grounds and heavy timber. That's going to be a challenge to maintain suppression activity on that fire, and that's currently in the range of 6,000 acres. The winds, I think, will hit the west side of the Cascades, and it could impact South Obenchain. We're having challenges maintaining that southeast line on that fire. It's 30,000 acres to the east of Medford. Holding lines otherwise on that fire, but I think we could have challenges on the southeast. And the other place that we would expect challenges and have been consistent the last several days is the east side of Lions Head in the Warm Springs Reservation. Continues to be problematic relative to holding containment lines. So the winds coming to us relatively consistently today and tomorrow and through Thursday with the thunderstorms will put pressure on those fires. The rest of the fires, I'm pleased to share, we're making really good progress, and I'll highlight a few of those. The Alameda fire between Ashland and Medford, the teams did outstanding relatively to minimizing the best we could the acres of growth after the first run that fire made. So we've been holding those lines for well over 48 hours. The Achi Creek fire, this is a significant fire up the Umpqua drainage, and acres on that fire at 121,000 acres. This is an enormous fire on the landscape. This is one of the ones that fully expect to be with us until the rains set in. However, tremendous progress on establishing control lines on that fire. This is an area we've seen a lot of forest landowner operators with dozers and heavy equipment making tremendous progress on that fire. Holiday Farm, I would put in that same experience. This is the fire up the Mackenzie Highway sitting at in around 170,000 acres. Once again, containment lines being established across that entire fire. And that's a tremendous amount of work with just 4 days of favorable fire on it. Outstanding progress. Once again, tremendous amount of equipment moving in there from local forest landowners. The challenge I think we have on that fire is on the north side. I think we can still push those lines to the north if we get a south wind on that. So we need some crews in there to help button up those lines on the north side. But an incredible amount of progress given the size of that fire. I'll move now to the complex of fires with Riverside, east in Clackamas County, east of Marion County, the Beachy fire along with Lions Head. This area, as I've highlighted before, in the range of 450,000 acres of fire on that landscape. But pleased to announce the southern part along the Santiam Canyon and where it moves south beyond the Santiam Canyon, establishing control lines on that south line, moving control lines from Lions all the way north to the Malala River, and starting to begin to establishing containment lines from Estacada south towards the Malala River. There's a finger of timber in between the Riverside and the Beachy fires in the range of 30,000 acres that's unburned right now. And we're going to do our best to establish control lines to maintain that last patch of living trees from your view from Colton and Malala and Scott Mills as they look up the mountain. That's a really important piece of ground now. So containment lines are being pushed up to try to keep those two fires from burning together. I moved again south to the Slater fire. This is the California that came into Oregon from California. We're sitting at about 30 to 40,000 acres on the Oregon side up and through Illinois Valley. Continue to make great progress once again on containment lines there. Other fires that I've briefed on in the past that look really good at this point. North Bank Road, those lines have been holding. This is out of Coos, been holding for quite some time, 4 or 5 days now. So feeling very comfortable on containment there. Also, Echo Mountain Complex out of Lincoln City, where we evacuated that community, holding lines there. Excellent work. Pike Road fire, Bay City, once again, holding lines on all those fires on the coast. So very proud of the work. 2 fires that were in and around the communities, Gaston, the power line fire, and then out of Newburgh, Chehalem Mountain fire, established and holding lines there. There's still a little bit of work, I think, to do on the Chehalem fire before we build a lot of confidence there. But that is the landscape today relative to where we stand. Absolutely immense amount of work in 4 days accomplished, and that sets the stage relative to what we can accomplish with another 5 days of fire weather. I am concerned, again, those winds, and I highlighted where we have some risks there. But overall, relative to what's on the landscape, moving forward favorably. And that's because of coordinated effort across all jurisdictions, landowners, rural fire departments, city fire departments, rangeland fire protection associations, landowners, contractors, all pulling in the same direction for the same cause, to minimize the spread of these fires. So excellent work to all. I briefed a couple days ago that we were hovering in the range of 3,000 personnel on the ground. We made a concerted effort nationally to move firefighters into Oregon to support. Quick response, we're sitting at 5,600 people. My target was to get to 6,000 as quick as possible and then evaluate. I think we'll need to add more resources, and those continue to roll in, as Governor Brown highlighted, from across the country and Canada. So outstanding work there. I will close. For us to be successful with aviation resources, when we get some clean air, which I'm expecting to see on the Coast Range, to really put those fires to bed, and we're expecting some clean air in eastern Oregon. In order for us to fly these aviation assets, I'm asking the public to keep those drones on the ground. We put temporary flight restrictions over all these fires, so we have a clean airspace which we can control. And when we have a foreign drone in that airspace, I have to ground those aircraft. So that is my message for the public. I would ask the media to help amplify that. And as always, I appreciate your engagement and carrying these critical messages. Thanks. End the report, Governor Brown.
Thank you, Chief Graff. Mariana Ruiz-Temple.
Thank you, Governor. This is Mariana Ruiz-Temple with the Office of State Fire Marshal. The Oregon Fire Service is actively engaged on fires throughout the state of Oregon, many of which Doug mentioned, and many initial attack fires. Doug mentioned that originally we had 3,000 firefighters on the ground. Over 600 firefighters were from the Structural Fire Service at that time, and thousands more not being tracked in the system as local IA. 1,000 firefighters from around the state that were truly heroes in those first 48 hours as they battled those fires within their own districts, to Governor Brown's point with Chief Rainbow. The priority for the Structural Fire Service and Unified Command on many of these fires are going to be continued mop-up and work around structures. The majority of the structural protection we feel very good about, but we're continuing to keep an eye on the weather and continuing that mop-up so that when we turn these fires over, we're in a good place structurally. And now beginning to keep an eye on recovery. As Doug mentioned, from the structural side, we will be reprioritizing and resetting where our assets are placed based on need, also based on local firefighters in their own district. We really want to get replacement crews for those that are working in and around their own districts and get them a break and away from their district to give them some time for reset. So that'll be part of our prioritization. Over the next 48 hours, starting today and over the next 48 hours, we do expect to implement demobilization plans on 242, Alameda, and beginning on the North Cascades complex. That will begin to free up more resources and input into the system. We expect to be putting more resources on Slater. In addition to the states that Governor Brown mentioned, we also are bringing in firefighters from Minnesota. Essentially, almost every state has some sort of response to the state of Oregon, and we can't thank them enough as we now begin to look towards recovery. And then I would just end that the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office and the Oregon Fire Service will stay actively engaged as we start to see the demob and glide slope out of these active fires, and continue to support our local EMs, our local communities, and the State Office of Emergency Management as we begin recovery and are back to normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Really appreciate your leadership. General Stencil, could you give us an update from the National Guard perspective, please?
Sure. Thank you, Governor. By the end of today, the National Guard is looking at having almost 700 soldiers and airmen mobilized for this effort, and by the end of the week, that number will be exceeding 1,000 Guard members. I'll start out by giving you an update with the traffic control points. Over this weekend, we've got more than 143 service members manning 26 points. Those are scattered across Jackson, Lane, Marion, Lynn, and Lincoln counties. We've got additional requests for more than 30 additional traffic control points across Jackson, Josephine, and the Warm Springs Tribal Nation that we're looking to fill. I expect that to take more than probably 150 additional guardsmen to fill those requests. On the aviation front, we've upped the number from 9 to 11 total aircraft. None of those are HA-60 Blackhawks. 5 of those have water buckets with the capability to surge to 6. 2 of those for medevac, and we continue to have 2 Lakotas for IR support and mission control. As you can imagine, our pilots are pretty frustrated waiting for this weather to lift, but we're anxious and hopeful that we're going to be able to fly in support of this, most likely down in Southeast Oregon and Lakeview here in the next 24 hours. With regard to firefighting support, over the weekend we placed 2 fire teams on station. The first one, NG1, on Saturday at the 242 fire in Klamath County. The second one yesterday at the Echo Mountain fire in Lincoln County. And then today we're moving out to NG3 to Archie Creek fire down in Douglas County. We're also in the process of mobilizing teams 4 and 5, another 250 guardsmen that are going to start training on Wednesday down at Camp Rylea. Expect them to be able to depart for fires on the 21st of September. With regard to outreach for acquiring additional teams to utilize under Emergency Assistance Compact, we've got one team that's coming forward from Idaho that includes EMAC support that we're going to be working with Oregon Department of Forestry to get them placed, and both Montana and Florida have also offered forward a couple of teams that we'll be able to utilize down the road here. Over the weekend, we were also able to place our fatality search and recovery team in Albany yesterday. That includes 8 airmen and their equipment. And we've also mobilized 10 guardsmen from our emergency response force to support the FEMA urban search and recovery teams that are coming into place as well. Last additional effort that I'll mention is we started an internal review at our end with regard to engineering capability for the recovery and cleanup as it's needed here, and we know it's coming in short order as well. You know, I'd just like to end with a thank you. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than 1,000 guardsmen supporting the state response by midweek. And during mobilization ceremonies for our folks when they go overseas for federal missions, the governor and I regularly thank all of the employers, the family, friends standing behind these guard men and women that we've mobilized. And while this is a shorter stateside call-up, the short notification to support this effort makes it no less turbulent for their families and employers. And I just can't thank you enough for your ongoing support. We truly can't do it without them. And I just want to thank you so much for standing behind them. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, General Stencil. Director Phelps from the Office of Emergency Management, could you please give a report?
Thank you, Governor. I want to thank my colleagues for the picture they've begun to paint or continue to paint of how our state truly has been pushed to the limits on this ongoing disaster response, and echo the gratitude to the responders, the volunteers, and now the help that is pouring in from across the country for firefighting, for support here at the Emergency Coordination Center, for support at our shelters. We're truly going to need all of that help and more to continue getting through this. We've asked for help. We're getting help from across the country. We've got staff in the Emergency Coordination Center from across the West Coast, and as the governor mentioned, more folks are on the way. But it really does require resources from the federal government, from the private sector, nonprofit and non-governmental organizations, and again, those states, our neighboring states and states from across the country that continue to assist us. We say in emergency management, all disasters are local, but I think one thing that is increasingly clear with this disaster, all disasters are personal. So I want to take a moment to talk about the human impact of these fires across our landscape. Given the complexity, the severity, and the geographic scope of the impacts of these fires, we're hearing a lot of different numbers. As we continue our response efforts and our recovery efforts, we're going to work to continue to deconflict numbers and ensure we're providing a clear statewide picture of what we know. Right now, here is what we know. Local law enforcement is working as safely and quickly as they can to confirm fatalities and to inform families. We need to make sure law enforcement is able to verify missing persons and reunite missing persons with their families where possible. This is a priority for us. Due to the critical and sensitive nature of reporting this information and the multiple agencies and organizations involved, including the Oregon Office of Emergency Management and the Oregon State Police, we continue to work directly with the state medical examiner to provide a total confirmed number of fatalities statewide. Today, that number is 10. We will update that number daily. We're following a similar process for confirmed missing persons. As of today, there have been 22 individuals reported missing associated with these fires. We want Oregonians to know, and those across the country, if you're concerned for missing family, please report that concern to the local law enforcement entity of where that person lived or where they were visiting when the fires occurred. We're also encouraging Oregonians who have evacuated to register with the American Red Cross Safe and Well network. This will help law enforcement identify those who still remain unaccounted for. I also want to talk about rumors and rumor control. All emergencies are public information emergencies, and we need to focus on getting timely and accurate information out to the public so you can make good decisions to take care of yourselves and your families. Rumors can cost lives. We're relying on government entities, official government sources, and our media partners to make sure accurate information is being conveyed responsibly. I want to close by mentioning how grateful we are at the Office of Emergency Management and all of the agencies and organizations working within the state's Emergency Coordination Center for how we see Oregonians taking care of each other. We've, as a state, been inundated with donations, and it's been beyond generous. Right now, what we're requesting, if you have the capacity to give and want to be of assistance, reach out to reputable, nonprofit, and voluntary organizations that are supporting this response: the Red Cross, the Oregon Food Bank, Team Rubicon, and others. You can find information by visiting OregonVOAD, VOAD.org. We also encourage Oregonians to find more wildfire recovery and response-related resources at the state's website established by our Joint Information Center, which is operating 7 days a week to provide information. That website is wildfire.oregon.gov. This will provide a list of county resources, where to donate, and how to get and how to give help. We're in this for the long haul. This is going to be a long duration recovery operation for our state, and we want to make sure that the generosity of Oregonians is able to be brought to bear as we continue to work through our ongoing response and our future recovery operations. End of report. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Director Phelps. Gabriella Goldfarb from the Oregon Health Authority. Do you have a few remarks?
I do. Thank you, Governor. I wanted to share health information on 3 topics of air quality and health, smoke and COVID-19, and staying safe in burned areas. So based on this morning's smoke coordination call with weather, air quality, fire, and health agencies, we do not see relief from harmful air quality until late in the week, closer to the weekend. And a short while ago, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality extended the current air quality advisory through Thursday. Even in some places where there may be limited improvement at times, that just means dropping from one bad air category to the next worst category. And we're seeing that play out with health impacts to people in our communities. Fully 10% of all emergency room visits across the state are for asthma-like symptoms now. While everyone can experience symptoms of smoke exposure, susceptible populations include pregnant women, children, the elderly, and people with heart or respiratory conditions. They are all at higher risk, as are people who work and exert themselves outdoors. And so we are really urging people to stop work outdoors when the air quality index reaches unhealthy levels or higher. When smoke does trigger a serious health effect, it will usually show up within a few days of exposure, but some people might experience effects up to a week or 2 after exposure ends. So we wanted people to be aware of that. And the message again remains to stay inside and follow recommendations for making cleaner air spaces in your work or home. And as Andrew was saying, you can find great information about that by visiting wildfire.oregon.gov. Next, I wanted to speak to smoke and COVID. There is some overlap between COVID-19 and wildfire smoke symptoms, such as cough, difficulty breathing, and headaches. But smoke impacts don't typically include fever, chills, or diarrhea. So if you have these kinds of symptoms, use the CDC's online COVID-19 symptom checker to see whether you should contact your healthcare provider. Finally, we wanted to share information about staying safe in burned areas. OHA collaborated with the Department of Environmental Quality and Oregon OSHA to pull together information for people once local officials allow you to return to burned areas to protect you from hazardous materials and injury. And we just got it posted again to wildfire.oregon.gov and would appreciate the media amplifying that message. Finally, of course, our hearts really go out to all of our community members who are facing those circumstances, and all of us are working together to make things better, the governor said. Thank you. End of report.
Thank you, Gabriella. I think we're ready for questions at this point.
Thanks, Governor. First question is from Les Zeitz with the Salem Reporter. Go ahead, Les.
Yeah, Governor, two questions for you. What is your assessment? What reports are you getting about the status of infrastructure in these fire areas? I'm speaking of highways and utilities like power and cable. And secondly, you talk about the long-term recovery effort. Do you intend to appoint some sort of a recovery czar to make sure that that operates as efficiently as possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Les. I'll let the state fire marshal talk about the structural damage, but particularly in terms of homes and outbuildings, it's going to be significant. In terms of power transmission, I expect that it will be significant as well. I'm not aware of specific road damage, but obviously that's something we have to have on our radar screens. In terms of the long-term recovery efforts, last week I stood up the governor's disaster recovery cabinet, state agencies working together to tackle the response. And this week I'll be setting up the governor's economic recovery council to really take a look at how we can remove barriers and ensure that Oregonians in these communities have the tools and the resources they need to rebuild and to recover. So that'll be set up this week. Fire Marshal Ruiz Temple.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. Currently, a lot of these fires are in a position where we will start to be able to make those assessments. We do have 2 urban search and rescue task forces that are on Alameda, Beachy, one that's on Holiday Farm and then a component on Beachy, and their number 1 priority is recovery. Secondly, evaluating that critical infrastructure, and thirdly, damage assessment. So that'll began yesterday, probably over the next 4 or 5 days, and those teams are working closely and actually prioritized and managed within the state ECC. I suspect those numbers will be put through that system through Director Phelps for reporting. Thank you.
Well, Governor, let me follow up on my question about the recovery. You're talking about standing up a disaster recovery cabinet, an economic recovery council. Who's going to be in charge?
The Disaster Recovery Cabinet is co-chaired by our Chief Operating Officer, Katie Koba, and my Deputy Chief of Staff, Barry Leslie. And the Economic Recovery Council will be co-chaired by Treasurer Tobias Reed and Labor Commissioner Val Hoyle.
Our next question is from Dirk Vanderhart with OPB. Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of quick ones. One, I just wanted to clarify Chief Graff's quote of numbers. I think he said 5,600 fire personnel. Is that all encompassing? So in other words, are the National Guard groups out there, are the fire marshal resources that have been described all part of that number, or is it more striated? And then just really quickly, secondly, Governor, you mentioned a letter to the president for a stepped up, a major emergency declaration. I thought that request had already been made, but I'm finding there's a lot of different steps in this process, so I just want to be sure I understand what that was.
The letter, good question. The letter is our request for emergency declaration. As you said, that was granted last week. The letter details and is the written report about why this is necessary. Just so Oregonians know, usually this particular detailed report takes weeks, if not months. But with the help of our Office of Emergency Management, Director Phelps, and frankly, the FEMA 10 Regional Director, Mike O'Hare, we were able to get that in a week, which is significant. Chief Graff, do you want to talk about the numbers, exclusive or inclusive of the National Guard, please?
Yes, thank you, Governor. The question is, how many firefighters do we have boots on the ground currently engaged? When I reference the number of firefighters, I'm speaking to those assigned to our incident management teams, of which we have 11 teams deployed. So these are the fire resources we bring to bear to support these complex incidents. They include the National Guard when they're deployed to those incidents. What they do not include is our initial attack forces that Mariana Ruiz-Temple clarified. She has, through the Oregon Fire Service, over 300 fire departments ready to serve, so I'm not tracked those numbers. And then for the Department of Forestry, we hire additional 600 seasonals who stand ready for initial attack fires, because we not only have to support the current large fires on the landscape, of which we have 5,600 firefighters deployed, we have to be ready for those new fire stats. So it's not inclusive of all that we have relative to capacity in Oregon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Next up, we have Gary Warner with EO Media. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, hi, Governor. Thank you. I know these are areas that have experienced disasters and that are also being investigated, but there's questions about how long it will take to reopen some of the east-west highways between Central Oregon, across the Cascades, and the Willamette Valley. Do you have any sort of time frame on that? What should businesses in particular be planning to do over the next 2 or 3 weeks in terms of getting their goods or whatever over to the west side?
Thanks, Gary. Director Phelps or Fire Marshal Ruiz-Temple, can either one of you answer that question?
This is Mariana Ruiz-Temple. The one thing I would say before, maybe Director, I'll hand that to you, is that there are still many areas in that in these the fire zones that still have fallen trees and snags. And although our fire service is actively engaged in there, so are utility crews and folks starting to clear the road. So it still will take a long time. I mean, I should say it still would take some time, but that is being coordinated at the local level through local EMs. But there's still various safety concerns based on where you are on the fire. So, Andrew Phelps.
Thanks, Mariana. Totally agree with that 100%. We still very much have a life safety issue, and we need to ensure everyone is protected and safe before any reentry can be made. We also need to note that all of the recovery is going to be on a community-specific timeline. Each of these communities is going to be moving forward at a different pace, and we also need to make sure that those infrastructure systems, water, electricity, communications, and emergency response services are available to support those folks as they return back to their communities.
Gary, this is Governor Brown.
Well, I guess
the only thing I would add is that we will work as quickly and as hard as possible to get these main arterials open across Oregon as quickly as possible. You may recall the Eagle Creek fire. I believe it took over 2 weeks to get I-84 open, but we have to be able to do it safely. I understand it's critically important for travel and for commerce, and frankly for the health and welfare of Oregonians, but we have to be able to do it safely.
I was just wondering if something like, I know that in terms of getting to the coast from the I-5, there's a set 1 or 2 highways that are supposed to really hold up under a Cascadia event. Is there one highway maybe that you're saying this is the one that we're going to try to clean up first and get everybody to be able to use?
Gary, I'm not able to answer that question. My suggestion would be that you reach out to ODOT and see if they can address the very good issues that you've raised.
Thanks, Gary. Next up, we have Hillary Baroud from the Oregonian. Go ahead, Hillary.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Over the weekend, some members of our congressional delegation had asked for additional federal fire crews to be sent in. They were thinking that we needed some more leadership to be able to fully use our National Guard resources. Can I get an update on whether that's still true at this point? It sounds like they're out there.
So, Hillary, you may be referring to the Department of Defense Army Battalion fire bosses, job bosses, crew bosses. My understanding is that they are in training and on their way, if that's what you're referring to. We have, in this crisis, we have received incredible support from our federal partners, and we're incredibly grateful for it. My focus, obviously, is making sure that our firefighters and our teams on the ground have all the people power and the support that they need.
Thanks, Hillary. Next up, we have Wright Gazaway from K2. Go ahead, Wright.
Thank you for taking the question. In the past few days, we've heard more and more from people about the quick evacuations in the areas of the Beachy Creek and Lions Head fires. Looking back, is there any regret that evacuation order wasn't given sooner?
I will let the Fire Marshal, Mariana Ruiz Temple, respond to that, please.
Yeah, I can speak specifically to Beachy. That fire came in very quick and very fast, and I can't speak to the exact times that they were implemented. In talking with folks that were in those areas, some of them had some warning as they were in level 2, but as the 50-mile-an-hour winds poured down into the canyon, they went into level 3 very quickly. So I can't speak to the exact times. I can say that listening to the amount of folks that have talked about it, there were a lot of folks that were able to get out of there, but it did come in quickly. And that incident management team that was on the scene actively worked with Lynn County Sheriffs and Marion County Sheriffs. They were actively involved throughout the whole evening on those evacuations.
And the only other thing I would add is that I had legislation in during the 2020 legislative session, Senate Bill 1536. And the bill would have provided, amongst other things, in addition, more boots on the ground and more resources available to our firefighters. It would have provided the Office of Emergency Management with additional resources to help our communities with their evacuation plans, and would have provided Oregonians additional assistance to recover when wildfire affects their communities. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass because the legislature did not have a quorum.
One quick follow-up on that. I've also spoken with people who have friends and family on the fire lines, and they pointed to Oregon's decision to send firefighters to California recently. Did that play into fighting these fires specifically last week as they were spreading so quickly?
Chief Graff or Mariana, Fire Marshal Mariana Ruiz Temple.
Thank you. No, it did not. The decision to send firefighters early on was when we were in a really steady state and not experiencing fires here in Oregon. Firefighters had been reset and back in state well before this event, and even leading up to the preparation and communication around the event.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Next up, we have Francine Kiefer with the Christian Science Monitor. Go ahead, Francine.
Thank you. Last week, Governor, you mentioned or you requested colleges and universities not to penalize students who are so needed in the firefighting force. It seems like fire seasons are getting longer and that's just becoming a fact of life. So my question is, what is going to happen with that contingent of students that are so vital? Last week it was mentioned they're upwards of a third of the force. So how are you all going to be thinking about longer fire seasons when you rely on a group that regularly has to go back in the fall?
Thank you for the question, Francine. I think there's absolutely no question that these fires raging across the West are a wake-up call that we have to address climate change. So again, I would make a call out for work at the local level, at the state level, and to the White House at the federal level to take action on climate change. As I mentioned earlier, I had legislation in the February 2020 session to address the recommendations of my wildfire council. And the council had been meeting for over a year and had a set of unanimous recommendations in addition to looking at efforts to mitigate fire through harvest thinning and prescriptive burning, efforts to suppress fire and adapt to what we expect will be extensively greater fire risks on the landscape. And obviously, we're going to have to look creative in terms of how we're going to deploy folks to fight fire, be it for different periods of time, and be it for this new level of fire that we're seeing. There's no question these fires are more fierce. They are extensively hotter. At least in the last couple of years, they've moved much more rapidly and are a very challenging type of fire to fight. I think we're going to have to look at tools, whether it's students, whether it's, as we're already using, Department of Corrections, adults in custody. We have 30 teams. We're going to have to really look at these efforts in terms of how we fight fire. Again, issues that the Wildfire Council addressed and that legislation would have attempted to address should it have passed. But I do think our priority is going to have to be to how do we mitigate and prevent fires at the outset, and that's where we should be spending a significant amount of time, energy, and resources as well.
Thanks, Francine. We have time for just a couple more questions, so we'll go next to Rick from KVAL. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you for taking my question. Regarding evacuations, particularly near the Holiday Farm fire, we've noticed some confusion among people when it comes to the evacuation points and whether or not there's overnight availability for stays. Has OHA provided guidance on evacuations to the counties involved with these wildfires?
I think the short answer is that the Oregon Health Authority is working with the Office of Emergency Management to make sure that that housing provided is non-congregate care to avoid the challenges of COVID. Where that's not possible, they are putting in place, Director Phelps can speak to this, but they're certainly working, whether it's at our local fairgrounds, to make sure that cots are appropriately distanced and that there's sanitation protocols being met. Director Phelps or Gabriella Goldfarb, do either one of you want to add to that?
Thank you, Governor. I'll speak real quick just to the evacuation process and the non-congregant versus congregant sheltering. Getting folks out of a congregant setting, or what you may typically see in other emergencies or other fire seasons outside of COVID, dozens of cots in a high school gym, for example. We wanted to make sure this fire season we were prepared to not do that or do that as rarely as possible. This firestorm has been no different. Currently, we have more than twice as many folks in non-congregant sheltering capacity, meaning hotels and motel rooms, that are in a congregant sheltering environment. So the Red Cross and the Oregon Department of Human Services continues to work to increase that number of folks in hotels and motels. We also have a lot of folks that are staying in RVs or staying with friends. Oregon Health Authority has been fantastic about providing and updating guidance to those shelter sites where we still have some folks in congregant settings to ensure physical distancing. Folks are wearing masks when they're inside in those shelters, and that proper sanitation is in place. And Gabrielle, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Phelps. I would just underscore your point. We are supporting with very clear guidance based on science about how to keep people safe, both from COVID and related health risks in congregate settings where those need to happen, and providing support to our local public health and tribal health folks who are the boots on the ground for a lot of this. So very cognizant, and because of that advanced preparation, we don't have anywhere near as many folks in congregate settings as we might have otherwise. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. We have time for just one more question. So last question goes to Dick Hughes. Go ahead, Dick.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Governor, you mentioned the 2020 legislative session, and I just wanted to follow up. At this point, are there any plans for another special session this fall or anything before the 2021 session to take up wildfire issues or financing or COVID or anything?
So I anticipate that we will have an additional special session before the February session, the long session of 2021. Timing of that, it's likely to be after the election, but I know that the legislature, as well as I, are feeling a sense of urgency in terms of the need. Our Oregon families are hurting in communities across the state. We've lost thousands of homes. And I know that we are all feeling extremely concerned and want to make sure that we get folks into shelter or appropriate housing before the rains begin. So at this point in time, likely to be after the election, but obviously up for discussion.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything you and everyone else is doing.
Thank you, Dick.
Thanks, Dick. That's all the time we have for questions today, everyone, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe out there.